Hi, my friends. I hope you're in excellent spirits wherever you are. I hope you're in good health, and I hope um, life is treating you fairly, my friends. Okay, so we're continuing our enlightenment, yeah. And I promised you that I will complicate the picture, right? And here we are complicating the picture. One of the things that I want you to pay attention, right, um, is the fact that pay attention to is the fact that Western Asia, right, what we have been calling Middle East for, since the early 20th century, right? Misnomerly, right? Western Asia was a crossroads of peoples, right? And we will look at the map, and you will see this once again, right? That you're dealing with a region, Western Asia, in Western Asia, where a multitude of people with different languages, with different cultures, with different, ultimately with different scripts and ultimately with different religions and whatnot, came and mingled together. Now I remember I took you through the Egypt's middle and new kingdom. We remember that the Egypt's middle kingdom, right, goes through the first half of the second millennium. Yes. Excuse me, just bear with me. It takes always a little bit for me to warm up, yeah, my friends. So just bear with me when that, my engines have to get going, so to speak. Okay, so remember that we dealt with Egypt's Middle Kingdom, right? And remember, okay, you're dealing with 41 years, right? After 2040, right, you get to 1999, right? And you're getting into the second millennium. So the first half of second millennium, as far as Egypt was concerned, what it was its middle kingdom, right? And the second half of the second millennium, right? And the second half from 1640 onwards to say, yeah, we went to 1100 with Egypt, with the new kingdom. This is the second half of this becomes the second half of the second millennium. That as far as Egypt is concerned, you're dealing with the new kingdom, right? But the turn of the second millennium also brought other people into Western Asia, right? In fact, as they call it, right? Ancient Near East, ancient Western Asia, right? Ancient Near East, ancient Western Asia was transformed by the arrival of new peoples, right? And just as the New Kingdom period, you begin to see in the second millennium, right? You begin to see an imperial Egypt, right? Imperial Egypt that you recall reached its boundaries, its borders, right? They conquered the land of Canaan and Phoenicia and whatnot on Eastern Mediterranean, right? And they went as north as the Taurus Mountains. Remember the New Kingdom Egyptian Empire was an imperial empire, right? So you're dealing at this in the second millennium. Yeah, this is the formation, this political formation of our collective ancient culture, right? You're dealing with gradually with political entities that are getting bigger and bigger, and they are land-based empires. You begin to talk about the age of empires from 2000 BCE right? Basically onwards. This meant that there were migrations and conquest and rivalry for access to resources, the rich resources of Western Asia, but also meant, excuse me, cultural contact of between different populations in this part of the world. And we are already talking about a very advanced world, right? And it's going to get more and more advanced as we go along, right? It was not as if our presentist history was created, as I have said 100 times, right, overnight, right, my friends? So you're not talking about only cultural contact, but you're talking about the economic integration, right, of this international sort of scene of the world cultures of the second millennium BCE, right? So there are two groups of populations that we're in fact dealing with here, right, that we're very much concerned with. One is the Semitic populations again, where we are talking Semitic speaking Assyrians, and the others are the Indo-European speaking Hittites, right? But for now, we are dealing with Assyrians, and I want to talk about Assyrians with you. Assyria comes to perform a major role in the history of the region because, amongst other things, during the Assyrian Empire, you begin to have dislocation of the people from the periphery into the centers of empire. Therefore, you will get, as we will see, mass migration and mass resettlement of the population, and the Hebrew resettlement, right, comes in this context, right? We're going to get to it also later. But what is the story with Assyria is that by 1900 we have these nomadic, right, this nomadic sort of Semitic population, right? Remember the Semitic population, Semitic speaking populations, right, had come into Mesopotamia and, well, Eastern Mediterranean. They were there, and but you remember that we have also migration of Semitic populations, starting with the Akkadians, for instance, right, in Mesopotamia. Well, part of this population, part of this Semitic population in the north, right, and we will see in northern Mesopotamia and Anatolia, right, were the nomadic Assyrians, right? And gradually these nomads came to control from their little sort of enclave and city that eventually they built and whatnot. They began to expand. And expansions, when you're talking about expansions, in the pre-modern world, my friends, this is one thing that you have to keep in mind, right? Expansions of empires has one reason only, right? Usually, to this day, yeah, and that is access to resources, right? Remember, our president, who is unfortunately now in hospital because he stopped wearing masks. Well, he never started to stop it. Um, um, why did I bring this up? I forget. But yeah, empires, right? Empires, and American Empire, right, that we had. I know God knows what's gonna happen to it, right? We're always all over the world in order to access resources, right? It is not as a result of the goodness of our heart that we go in expand our political sort of configurations, right? So anyway, gradually these nomadic populations went in search of trade routes, right? Access to resources. That was their goal and their aim, right? And then eventually, they created. They became caravan merchants, right? And had gained control over an extensive trade network, right, that had come to exist already, right? We remember the trade of the ancient world with the various regions, right? So they take over these trade routes, right? And give local rulers protection, right? And eventually they create sort of a settled situation without wars and whatnot, right? And they brought wealth to the local rulers of Anatolia and northern Mesopotamia, right? At some point, they were part of the Akkadian empires, right? And in fact, were Akkadian speakers, right? And until later on, when the Amorites come in, and we're going to talk about Amorites, another Semitic population, yeah, my friends. So they created wealth for the local rulers. They created wealth for themselves. They said. And they married into important urban families, and they started serving as administrators and officials for the local rulers and whatnot. And gradually, right, gradually they came to control an extensive land land in Western Asia, right? Um, um, and they created one of the first major empires, right? Major empires, and that the world had seen. Remember, I mean, we are still talking about 1900, right? So we're still in the Middle Kingdom period, right? I mean, we're talking, let's say, 1700. We're still in the Middle Kingdom period, right? We are dealing with the Hyksos invasions and whatnot, right? That is happening in the south here, right? But anyway, they start to expand in the directions of trade, right? And trade routes, and we're going to see how they expand, right? They were, as I said, a Semitic population, and originally they spoke Akkadian before Aramaic, the language of Arameans that come after Akkadians, huh, my friends, right? Remember, we left us with the Akkadians, right? Sargon the Great, right? After the Akkadians, we will talk about it. Come the um, um, Aramean population, right? Also Semitic, and eventually their language becomes a very simplified sort of system of writing, and their language becomes easy to understand, and it becomes the lingua franca, right, of the ancient world. Lingua franca, right, means the language that is universal, the language that everybody sort of needs to know in a particular juncture of history, that one culture or the other is dominant. Currently, yeah, the Western culture, quote unquote, is the dominant culture, right? So everywhere you go, people speak English, right? At some point, it was French, right? And in the ancient world, becomes Aramaic, right? But don't forget that the script is still, the language eventually becomes Aramaic, which is a Semitic language, but the script still remains, right? What does it remain? Cuneiform. In Western Asia, the script remains cuneiform, whereas in Egypt, you have your hieroglyphics that are gradually becoming more and more simplified as well, right? So historians, like with everything, they like to divide, right? Periods, divide cultures into periods, right? And of course, going after the Egyptian sort of setup, which they applied to Mesopotamia, they also applied that to Assyria, right? So you have the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom of Assyria, and the late empire, which is also known as the Neo-Assyrian Empire. So again, we go to comparative chronology, right? So you need to actually make a column here for Anatolia, my friends, right? And realize that you're dealing here with the Assyrians basically from 1900 to 600s, right? You will see then you're dealing at the same time, right? You're dealing with the Hittites that come also 1900 to 1100s, right? In Anatolia, right? And then the Assyrian Empire, right? The Neo-Assyrian Empire, right? That takes control basically from 900 to 600 over an extensive sort of land mass in Western Asia and Africa. So we're going to get to all of that right now. Okay, but Assyria started as a very small city, right? It started as a city of Ashur, right? Ashur was also the name of the god of Assyria. Remember, we're basically at this time you're dealing with basically a city-state, right? That has its own particular god, right? And therefore the name of the god is called Ashur, from which you get not only Assyria, but you get Syria eventually, right? Okay. In Sumerian, right, which is an isolate language, the city was known as Subarta to the Sumerians, right? Ashur was located, as we will see, in the northeast of Babylon, right? Where merchants who traded in Anatolia became extremely wealthy. There is, as we will see, a network of cities, right, in Anatolia that creates a network of trade, right? And Ashur is one of those cities, and increasingly this city of Ashur becomes wealthy and affluent and grows into prosperity. So if you want to look at it, right, we are here. Remember again, we are in Mesopotamia. This is our Syrian desert. You see here that you have the land of Canaan, right, my friends? I want you to pay attention that there is this Amuru, right? Amuru, which are the Amorites, right? Amorite tribes. Also here you have your city-states, right, of Mesopotamia, Uruk, Lagash, right, Babylon, Kish. You remember you have your Elam and Susa in the Iranian plateau, right? And of course you have your mountains and whatnot. But here is what I'm talking about, right? Here is the network of cities of Upper Mesopotamia, right? And here in Anatolia that we will see that also that become a trade network, right? And it in fact becomes a node. These become a node, like a center, right? That connects the two sides of the Fertile Crescent together, and of course connects it to Iran, and then connects the Fertile Crescent to an Eastern Mediterranean, to what later on becomes Europe, right? Quote unquote, of course. Okay, so here is the Principality of Ashur, right, in northern Mesopotamia. You see it. This is the original homeland of Assyria, right? So this is Assyrian homeland, and you see the green, right? It is the greatest extent, right? The greatest extent of Assyrian Empire, basically taking over the Fertile Crescent as well as Africa, right? As far as the cultures of Egypt, and of course, the minute you're talking about Egypt, you're talking about Nubia. We know all of that, right? And inner Sahara. And you know, later on the Phoenicians come, right? At the end of this period, Phoenicians come, and we're going to talk about it, around 1200 or so, and Assyria gets connected with Phoenicia, and Phoenicia has control of all of Mediterranean, and in fact, you know, the Western Asia is ruling the world, right, at that time when we get to it, right? But anyway, we have very little information about Assyria in the third millennium, right? We know that it belonged to the empire of Akkad, right? That ruled for basically a century, remember, as well as the third dynasty of Ur. Assyria was part of these political sort of conglomerations, if you will, right? Remember that Sargon of Akkad had already created what was tantamount to a mini empire, right? During this period, right? So Assyria fell into it, and that was taken over by the third dynasty of Ur, right? And but our sources, right, for this later period of Assyrian history, and once we get into the second millennium, are many thousand Assyrian letters and documents that of trade, right? Trade colonies in Cappadocia, and we will see that Cappadocia is part of Anatolia, right? One of the important ones of these sort of trade colonies was the city of Kanesh, right? So here you see the old Assyrian Empire, my friends. This is the extent of the old Assyrian Empire, and you know, you recall the Akkadians. This is the empire of Akkadians, right? And then the Assyrians come and they extend that, right? Extend what was, of course, they are not in control, or not yet in control of lower Mesopotamia, right? Sumer and the Sumerian city-states and whatnot, but they will gain control of that, as we saw, right? By the end of their empire, they're not only controlling all of Mesopotamia, but but also they're controlling Egypt, right? At the height of their power, right? So this is the city of Kanesh, right? And this is the city of Kanesh, and this is Anatolia for us, right? Part of Anatolia, and these are the cities that are nodes of trade, yeah. And Kanesh or Karum, right, is this city here, I want you to keep in mind, pay attention to this city here, also Hattush, right? So Karum was a port of, the name given to the ports of ancient Anatolia, right, from 20th to 18th century BC, right? The major center being Kanesh, the major center of Karum being Kanesh, right? So we remember Assyrian topography by now, right? It's northern Mesopotamia, right? Originally of the empire, right? It's more than northern Mesopotamia. It's very mountainous. It's not flat like the expanse of Sumer or what Akkad had created, right? Assyria is hillier, has more temperate climate, and it rains a lot because it's mountainous, right? It is more exposed to raiders from the mountains to the east and north of it than the raiders from the plain to the west, right? Peasant farmers were foot soldiers, right? And that they functioned as such through the Assyrian Empire. So once again, we look at our map here. You see Assyria, your Akkad, your Sumer, right? This is your Syria, right? And the Amaru are here, right? The Amorites are here, and we will get to the Mitanni pretty soon, also. Yeah. Okay. Don't get confused. Just pay attention, my friends. Okay, we are talking about this part of the world. Look at it, right? It's a connecting part of the world, right? It connects Asia to quote-unquote Europe, it connects Asia to Africa, right? And it is located in one of the greatest sort of continents that we have, namely Asia, right? So this is the old Assyrian Empire, right? You see that it is very long. It lives a long time, right? It is basically close to 7 centuries that it ruled, that has control of this expanse of the empire. And by the time we get to here, you remember Egypt is already up to here, right? And there is the Hattush, the city of Hattush here, right? We remember that, right? Okay, so okay, my friends. So this is the old Assyrian Empire, right? We talked about this, right? They are, besides the Assyrians, besides the Akkadians that have become sort of that have come, our Semitic population of the region, right? There comes Phoenician and the Canaanites. So I want to. This is a map of later Roman Empire, and we'll talk about this later. But let me see. No, this, I'm sorry, this is a wrong map. I mean, it's a map of the same area, but it's not fit for our purposes here. So we forget about this map, right? And here we go to this other map that we wanted, right? And which shows Assyrian Empire, right? You see the land of Canaan, right? This is where we thought that the Hyksos are coming from, remember, in 1750 into Egypt, right? This is the land of Canaan, this is the land of Phoenicians, and we will talk about Phoenicians, right? And here you see the Aramean tribes, Aram near Damascus, right? In Assyria, again, Aramean Aramean tribes here, and excuse me, of course, this way is Mesopotamia, right? So to the east, right, is Mesopotamia. And in fact, we see part of Euphrates, right here, right, going to the highlands of Anatolia. Okay, so but then for a number of reasons, right, that a number of different centers emerge in Western Asia and the Eastern Mediterranean, right? So Assyria is collapses, and then that empire collapses, and then it needs to sort of regain its strength, right? And there we get by the beginning of by the late 10th century BCE, the beginning of 9th century, right, from 800s to 612, basically, 911 to 612, but we only have 11 years from this century, right? And we get to the 9th century until the 7th century. They basically rule for 200 years during the Neo-Assyrian Empire, right? But here they come across far-flung lands and diverse people as a result of it. So you see, if you see the growth and traction of the empire, right? You see that this is Assyrian Empire, right? Circa early 9th century, right? But this, but I'm sorry. Hold on. Let's make it color coordinated, my friends. No, this one, not this one. Sorry. Okay, where are we? Here, yeah. But imagine, yeah, all of this, yeah, becomes the Assyrian Empire by 671 BCE. Remember, therefore, we have gone into the chronology of Egypt, right? I mean, after the New Kingdom, right, that comes to 1100s, right, you then get one of the other invasions that you get, right, is, well, you had already Hyksos, right, 1750, right, and now you get Hyksos, and now you get the Assyrians, and there are other people that come in between, we'll see, you remember Egypt during the New Kingdom period had become an empire in its own, yeah. But after that, right, it is taken over by Assyria, among others, right. They went westward, the Assyrian Empire, right, across the steppe as far as the Mediterranean. They went north into the mountains, north of Zagros Mountains, right, which is Urartu Mountains, part of Caucasia, right, my friends, and it is currently modern Armenia, right, and they crossed the Zagros onto the Iranian plateau, and they reach Babylonia, right? They grow their empire, right? And as a result, they connect, right? This is the first time that this vast part of the world, right, of Africa and Asia, right, is integrated in the second millennium, right, connected to each other. There is long distance trade, there is tribute, there is taxes, there are this is the age of empires, right? Age of empires, second millennium, age of empires in Western Asia and Africa, right? And Assyria establishes strong political interest in Syria and Anatolia. When we get to the Hebrews, my friends, right? Now you know, right? Now you're smarter, right? Now you know what happened, right? With what happened between with the Israelites, right? That they were mass deportation, right? They were sent to exile. Who sent them to exile, right? At the first time, right? The Assyrian Empire, because yeah, exile to the center of the empire, right? Because they are a very powerful group. They're a rich group. They're craftsmen among them. They're tradesmen, major tradesmen, right? The Hebrews, and of course the Assyrians want to benefit from their participation in the centers of their empires. So this is what the Neo-Assyrian Empire does, my friends, right? Goes north into Urartu. This is Armenia, right? This is the Caspian Sea. Remember, this is the Black Sea. Caucasus, right? So when you're talking about the Caucasus here, yeah, it's part of Armenia and part of Assyria that we are talking about, right? Also, um, um, okay, so you see that here, they go up to, you see that they go to Mesopotamia, right? They go into Egypt, they take over all of Eastern Mediterranean, right? And here, remember, we get here comes, right, the story of Judah and Israel, the territories of Judah and Israel, and we will get that when we get to our religious systems later on. Okay, so the Assyrians are the first empire. If I ask you, my friends, which is the first empire that connected, right, that became a sort of a universal empire by connecting all these people of Western Asia and Egypt together and Africa together, right? You say it was the Assyrian Empire, not the Akkadians, not the Egyptians, right? Not the Babylonians, right? Not the third dynasty of Ur, right? But the Assyrians, right? So the king, right? The king was one of the most powerful, right, beings in sort of in the Assyrian also sort of pyramid of population, right? So they believe that their gods, especially Ashur, right, has chosen their kings, right, as their earthly representatives. So their notion of kingship is closer, obviously, to the Mesopotamian than to the Egyptians, right? Where you have Egyptians, except for the short period of the Amarna period, right? You have the Egyptians basically claim king, Egyptian pharaohs claiming divinity, right? All right. So in Assyria, the successor of the kings would be their sons, right? And the choice would be confirmed by divine oracles, right? The kings were all buried in Ashur, right? The city of the main god, right? And what do you think? If you have such extensive empire, how do you think you communicate? Right? Such extensive, I mean, you're talking about thousands of miles, my friends, right? And in case of Assyrians, you have to go through hilly countries and whatnot. So what do? You maintain your roads, right? You maintain an extensive network of roads in order to connect all your cities, in order to connect the merchants together, the network of merchants together, and whatnot. And you want to know what's happening in your empire, right? So you have a network of messengers and spies, right? for communication and for information, right? Intelligence gathering, right? So once again, this is the city of Ashur here, right? And you see your Ur here, and Nineveh, right? Another important center of Assyria, right, is here. One of the places, right, into which the Jews were sent into exile, right? Assyria itself, right? And inside of Iran, we're going to talk about it later. So this is the imaginative replication of the city of Ashur, right? And I want you to keep in mind that it is also on the river, right? It's on the um, I should know this. I should know this. Okay, on the river, we should know this, on the river Tigris, right? On the river Tigris, right? So therefore you see the shipping and whatnot. And when you're talking about ships, right? When you're talking about ships, right? And you're talking about naval empires, right? At the end of the second millennium, right? You're talking about the Phoenicians, right? Who again are they come into the scene much earlier, of course, but shipping, right, is one of their main. Remember the cedar land of those of you who have read Gilgamesh already, yeah, and Mesopotamia, remember where we got our woods from? Where Eastern Mediterranean, right, and Phoenicia, right? The Assyrian kings, right, appointed officials, they heard complaints, although the Assyrians are known for being in their wars, right, extremely cruel and having extremely cruel punishments, right? But for the most part, right, they had the loyalty of their subjects through their during their empire, right? So they had an army of scribes, right? And of course, remember we said that in the new kingdom, right, we are now talking about kings and pharaohs calling them each other brothers and cousins and whatnot, right? So you have diplomatic relationships, right? Serious diplomatic relationship, right? The king is a military leader. He plans the campaigns, right? He supervises the state religion, right? And he spends a lot of time in rituals, right? And here we see that two Assyrian scribes, for instance, right? And again, my friends, we are talking about the second millennium BCE, right? That are compiling a list of the spoilers of their war, right? This is an Assyrian, a very important Assyrian king of the Neo-Assyrian period, right, from Nineveh, right, and the other major center of Assyrians that I told you, depicted as hunting lions, right, and hunting lions is of course, a way in which kings showed their prowess, right, over enemies and whatnot. And they were, of course, fond of hunting, and hunting had spiritual as well as earthly dimension to it, right? Besides the fact that it was sort of fun and entertaining, right? It was also a sort of a reflection on overcoming your beastly sort of animals, right? The king did not make any decisions without consulting the gods, chief among them Ashur, who was superior, of course, to other gods, right? Because just as in the Egyptian case, right? Because the god is supporting and the troops against the outside forces and enemies. And here is a depiction of the god Ashur or Asur, right? And here you see Ashur anointing, and this is the tree of life, right, of the Assyrians, okay? And they were adept at propaganda, right? Government propaganda that secured support for military campaigns, right? They cataloged their military victories, and they posted inscriptions of them, excuse me, through their empire, right? They extolled the charisma of their king, right? And promised ruthless punishment to everyone who resisted the kings, right? And their punishments were cruel enough, right? Here is the scene of punishment. I can tell you what they're doing to this poor fellow, right? And you can imagine what has happened to these poor fellows, right? Um, and um, and well, um, and you see that already what has happened to his hands and feet, right? Okay, so cruel punishment, right? If you think that, you know, okay, we are not that cruel nowadays, but we are as cruel. Believe me, my friends, right? This is not the territory of the ancients only, right? So, and then, as far as Assyrians are concerned, we get, depictions such as this. We have no idea what this might be, right? But we suspect, right, is some kind of breathing instrument underwater, right? Probably for catching fish, right? And whatnot. So, again, please let us give enough credits to those who have come before us, right, my friends? They were great in their art and architecture. Excuse me, I don't understand. Why is that? This is not working. Okay, now it's working, right? Um, so, the sculptures and their depictions are monumental. We will see specimens of them. They had, improved battle sort of configurations, sieges, right, and whatnot, right, and the king, right, was usually depicted larger than anyone else with the appearance of a god in order to awe and intimidate the propaganda. Now, this is an Assyrian relief of the king Gilgamesh, right, of our ancient Sumerian period, which we will deal with when we will come to law, right? And here is a specimen of your Assyrian palaces, right, my friends? If you go to the Met, right, you will see, right, the enormity of their reliefs and sculptures and their architecture, right? This is the walls of Nineveh, right? Just imagine the kind of this is of course recreated, I think, right? This looks very, very modern, but anyway. So I want you to learn other parts about Assyria on your own and from your books, my friends, right? I want you to keep attention to the chronology, right, of these not in detail but in general, right? The chronology of the Assyrian conquest. Here you get Assyrian charioteers, right? Again, right? Their war technology, right? That was improved upon, right? Here we go. Um, they had superior military organization and technology. They created, right? Here is a depiction of a siege situation of Assyrian by Assyrian soldiers, right? I talked about security, right? And the network of spies that gathered intelligence, right? The couriers and signal fires provided long distance communication, right? And they used terror tactics, right? And so on and so forth. One of the other things that they did, right? The Assyrians, what mass deportations, right? Forcibly uprooting in entire communities and resettling them elsewhere. Why do they do that, right? In order to bring them closer to the center of the empire, because the farther you go from the center of the empire, the looser the control of the empire over its subjects, right? This is one of the first Assyrian kings, Sennacherib, who indulged in an unsuccessful siege of Jerusalem. When we get to the Hebrews, we will talk about the Hebrew Assyrian connection more, right? The records document that it was not just the Hebrews that they dislocated, but over 1 million of their population, right? Shifted human resources from periphery to the center, these deportations. As you can imagine, right, the Assyrian administration must have been an amalgam in order to sustain such diverse populations and such diverse peoples, right, without leading them to rebellion and whatnot, and without putting them under so much pressure that they become terrorists against you. I'm not talking about domestic terrorists, right, my friends, right? So-called terrorists. No, I mean, domestic terrorism is domestic terrorism. It's our definitions of terrorism when it comes to Western Asia or Middle East, right? That is problematic, right? And there is one of the better. This is here again one of the reasons to call Middle East Western Asia, because there are all kinds of, right? There are all kinds of implicit assumptions, right? Terrorism, aggression, wealth, right? And bigotry and whatnot that comes to mind when you talk about the Middle East, right? And none of this is who has the historical knowledge to deal with any of this, right? None, except people like you, my friends. Yeah. So I want you to know that depending, there was not a single enduring method of governing an empire that included nomadic and sedentary kingship groups, temple city-states. So they worked, right? The Assyrian administration realized, right, that you have to work around the existing systems, right, in order to keep the loyalty of your subjects together, right? Of course, as in other ancient worlds, as well as our modern world, look at the um, the Tea Party, right, my friends? Look at the Tea Party, and realize that priests and those who ostensibly tend to the soul, right, have always been there, and for the most part have been a center of power, and for the most part one of the richest, right, sort of sort of groups, formed one of the richest groups of Western Asian and African populations, right, as they do to this day, right? The Catholic Church is one of the major landowners in New York, right? Anyway, okay, so of course this empire generated wealth, right? You accumulated the wealth of other parts of the world, right? And with that wealth, with the tributes that you got, with the taxation that you imposed, right? Now you had to maintain, your infrastructure, you paid everybody, right? And the rest of it, right? And you hoarded a lot, and then the rest of it, unlike our 20th century presidents and whatnot, is spent on building magnificent royal cities and whatnot. This is again another hunting shot, right? And here, of course, are American guards, right? 2008, not that long ago, right? At the ruins of the city of Ashur. So this is, right, the new imperialism that we are talking about, right? Of course, commerce and merchants, right, developed tremendously during this period, right? And royal investment made sure, right, that the subjects remain loyal to their Assyrian rulers, right? The core of the population were free land owning population, right, and farmers and artisans and whatnot, right? They were the free members of society, and of course we had our slaves and debtors and prisoners of war who had nevertheless legal rights and could rise to positions of influence, right? And the government did not distinguish. Does it ring a bell, my friends, between native Assyrians and foreigners in their land? Think about this, right? We're talking about 3 millennia ago, right? And let's think about tolerance, right? and realize that even slaves were referred to as human beings 3,000 years ago in the Assyrian culture, right? They say they were liable to the same legal protections and entitled, military service and the same labor, right, and so on and so forth. All of this, sustaining all of this empire, right, was obviously only possible because you had, right, to begin with, a surplus agriculture as you needed it every place in Western Asia and the centers of civilization that we have talked about. Here you get an Assyrian food festival, right? Depiction of an Assyrian food festival. Here you see a modern depiction, modern Assyrians in their traditional clothings, right? I have talked about trade enough, my friends, for you. Long distance trade, right? And of course, luxury goods, right? Metals, textiles, dyes, gems, and ivory, the same thing. Silver, right, which existed, remember, quite a bit in Anatolia, right? They was the basic medium of exchange for them, right? And because they did not have any coins, right? So the weight of silver was what was counted, and I want you to keep it to keep in mind, right? Look. I mean, the resources we're talking about, resources of Western Asia, right? The Assyrians have collectively inherited not only the cultures of Western Asia, right, but the resources of Western Asia. And where do they trade with, right? You see, we will come to know about these. In the Aegean Sea, they traded with the Mycenaeans. Traded with the Minoans, and of course the rest of the trade with Mesopotamia and Egypt, right, and east to Iranian plateau, right? Of course, they were scholars and scientists, right? An elaborate sort of many of them, right? Who built on, right? Preserved list of animals and plants, right? I mean, you keep all of this in mind, my friends, because when we come to the Greeks, then we have to realize that they are a footnote in history, right? Actually, so Assyrians. Well, what are their contributions? Again, in geographic terms, astronomical occurrences, mathematics, astronomy, right? But they all believes, all ancient people believes that gods or demons cause diseases, but they indulged in medicine, and they had physicians and they experimented with sciences. We have not talked about the Iranian culture yet, because that is a very important culture that we'll talk about also, my friends. And there you see that you have eyes, but that reconstructed sort of eyes, right? Um, for blind people. Not that the eyes could see, but at least yeah, you well, the science of it, believe me, it escapes me. Yeah. Anyway, so science and scholarship, right? Here is an example of an Assyrian star planisphere, right? And then we come to Assyrian libraries, right? Especially the library of Ashur Bani Paul, right? Ashur Bani Paul, 668, Assyrian kings, one of the last Assyrian kings in Nineveh, right? Where we have discovered more than 25,000 tablets or fragments of tablets, i.e., 25,000 books, right, my friends? A library, an ancient library, right, of the first millennium, in this case, BCE, right, that contains, right, more than 25,000 sort of tablets. And here is the way they maintain them. This is the Ashurbanipal's library, right? This is again a replica of their palaces, right? And so on and so forth, right? And I'm staying on these maps so you can figure out the chronology again, my friends. And I think I am going to kind of stop here, just tell you that the libraries were called House of Knowledge, right? And this is the reproduction of the library of Ashurbanipal in where the Kurds are now in Iraq, right, my friends? So and that you see the the fang of our session for Assyrians. I bid you farewell, my friends, and I hope you feel even more intelligent after listening to this lecture. For now, bye.